This day and time. What happened today, years ago.
Okay, let's unpack this. June 18th. Sounds like just another date on the calendar, right?
Yeah, maybe a Tuesday, maybe a Thursday, depending on the year. But as we dove into the sources for this deep dive, well, it's pretty striking.
It really is. It became clear this single day has been a surprisingly critical kind of hinge point for some massive shifts in how power actually works throughout history.
It's fascinating, isn't it? How one date can just echo across centuries, capturing these moments where the very nature of power seemed to, well, fundamentally change.
Absolutely. And the sources we've gathered, they highlight three really distinct June 18th moments, hundreds of years apart.
But we've got a Holy Roman Emperor's coronation way back in 1155.
Then a pivotal British military retreat during the American Revolution in 1778.
And finally, the United States declaring war in 1812.
And looking at these isn't just about, ticking off dates. It's a chance to really see how power itself has evolved.
Yeah, we're talking about a shift from power as something deeply personal, something built on ritual and, frankly, raw force.
To power dictated more by the global strategy, by alliances.
And then finally to power asserted through, national identity and declared principles. It's quite a journey.
So our mission in this deep dive is to really extract the most important insights from these sources. We want to use these specific June 18th events as windows sort of into the ever-changing ways humans organize and exercise power. Ready to jump in?
Let's do it. Where else to start but nearly 1,000 years ago?
Exactly. Back to 1155 in the Holy Roman Empire. Our sources, they paint a picture of a really fragmented place.
I mean, seriously fragmented. Think about it. Over 1,600 small states just in Germany alone.
Wow. And the role of emperor, it wasn't hereditary, right? It was elected.
Elected, yeah. And its actual power had been significantly weakened, especially after those big clashes with the church, like the investiture controversy.
Ah, yes, the big struggle over who got to appoint bishops and abbots.
Right, so real power was often scattered among local lords, bishops. It was a messy political landscape. Lots of competing claims to authority, imperial, papal, local.
And into this steps Frederick Barbarossa. The sources are pretty quick to point out his unique background.
Born from rival families, the Hohenstaufen and the Welfs.
Which seemed to position him perfectly, didn't it, to maybe unite some of these fractious elements.
That was the hope, anyway. His driving ambition, according to the sources, was to restore the glory, the central authority of the empire. He was looking back to someone like Charlemagne.
But he seems practical, too. He focused on stabilizing things in Germany first, making agreements with the princes.
Smart move. Secure the base before turning his attention south to Italy. Italy had wealthy cities, potential power base, but they were also independent power centers themselves.
And his first campaign there, in 1154, it was a success. He conquered Milan, even leveled Tortona.
Brutal, but effective in establishing dominance.
And that success let him take the Iron Crown of Lombardy and Pavia. That made him king of Italy.
Which was a crucial step, because getting the big prize, the imperial crown, that required being crowned by the Pope in Rome.
Which brings us directly to June 18th, 1155, the date of that coronation in Rome.
And the sources detail this really fascinating diplomatic dance just before the ceremony.
Yeah, Frederick meets Pope Adrian IV, and there's this incredibly symbolic dispute over the Scripturis Officium.
That's the ceremonial duty, right? Where the emperor leads the Pope's horse.
Exactly. It sounds minor maybe, but it was loaded with meaning about who was ultimately superior.
And Frederick initially refused.
He did. Saw it as beneath his imperial dignity, like a sign of subservience to the Pope as a man, not the office.
Tricky line to walk.
Definitely. After some intense back and forth, he reluctantly did it. But the sources report him saying, pro Petro, non Adriano.
For St. Peter, not for Adrian. Wow, you can just feel the tension in that.
It perfectly encapsulates that power struggle, doesn't it? Secular imperial authority versus religious papal authority. Both needed each other, but neither wanted to fully bow.
So after that delicate moment,
the sacred ritual happens inside St. Peter's Basilica. Frederick swears to protect the church. He's anointed with holy oil.
And he receives the symbols of his office, the sword, scepter, and crown, directly from the Pope.
This is it. The moment he officially becomes Holy Roman Emperor, cloaked in all that religious legitimacy.
That ritual was absolutely central, wasn't it, for validating his claim in the medieval world?
Totally. But here's the part that the sources really highlight, and it shows that, well, the brutal reality of power back then.
Okay.
While that sacred, elaborate ceremony was unfolding inside St. Peter's, just outside the walls, brutal violence was erupting.
What happened?
Frederick's troops were crushing an uprising by the Roman commune.
Ah, the movement for a secular independent Rome, led partly by Arnold of Brescia.
That's the one. They wanted Rome free from both the Pope and the Emperor. They represented that growing power of independent cities, challenging the old hierarchies.
And the sources, what do they say about the outcome?
It's chillingly specific. Over 1,000 Romans were killed that very day, June 18th, 1155, steps away from the coronation.
So, on the same day, you have the ultimate sacred ritual of bestowing power and intense bloody suppression of a rival power center.
Exactly. So when we look at this June 18th, what really stands out is how medieval power, at this level anyway, wasn't just one thing. It was this complex bargain.
You needed the church's legitimacy, the ritual. You needed the emperor's personal authority.
And crucially, you needed the willingness and ability to use immediate brutal force to crush any local challenge.
And it wasn't clean. It was forged in ceremony and violence, almost side by side. Power was personal, tied to symbols, divine right.
But completely reliant on military might to actually make it stick.
A world away from the next June 18th we're looking at.
Couldn't be more different. Okay, let's leave Rome in 1155 and jump forward over 600 years. June 18th, 1778, North America, American Revolution.
Right, and the whole definition of power here looks dramatically different.
The sources tell us the British had captured Philadelphia, the American capital, back in 77, a big symbolic win for them.
Sure, symbolically. But holding it was proving to be a major strategic headache. It stretched their supply lines really thin, tied down a lot of troops.
Meanwhile, Washington's army, yes, they were suffering a valley forge, but crucially, they were also being professionally trained, reorganized.
Hans Steuben, right, whipping them into shape. They weren't defeated, just enduring and improving.
And then the strategic game completely flips. February 1778.
Franco-American alliance. Huge. That followed the big British defeat at Saratoga the year before.
And the sources really emphasized this wasn't just, signing a piece of paper.
No way. It fundamentally transformed the war. What was a colonial rebellion suddenly becomes a global conflict. You've got major European powers involved now.
And the biggest factor introduced by that alliance?
The French Navy, no question.
The sources make it crystal clear. The potential for a French naval blockade of Philadelphia
suddenly made holding the city strategically untenable. You risk trapping General Clinton's entire army.
Holding the symbolic capital just wasn't worth the risk of losing the actual army, especially when faced with French sea power.
Exactly. The strategic calculation, viewed through that new global lens, it just dictated a change.
Which brings us to June 18, 1778. On this day, British General Henry Clinton orders the evacuation. All 15,000 troops out of Philadelphia.
The main force pulls out overland through New Jersey, heading for the safer base in New York City.
And this decision, it had immediate, harsh consequences for locals. Right?
Oh, definitely. Those loyalists who had supported the British occupation, suddenly they had to flee their homes, abandon everything, and retreat with the army.
They were often seen as traitors by the Americans left behind. A tough spot.
A very tough spot. And the sources also mention this almost bizarre detail from about a month before their retreat.
Ah, the Mischianza Party, May 18th.
Yeah, this incredibly lavish, over-the-top farewell party thrown by British officers for General Howe, who was leaving.
It gets highlighted as this symbol of, aristocratic indulgence, totally disconnected from the war's reality.
Right. It seemed completely out of touch with the strategic pressures they were under, the chaos. Drew a lot of criticism, even at the time.
It's like a metaphor, isn't it? The old ways pomp, status versus the new reality of hard strategic necessity.
Perfectly put. And what's fascinating here, this withdrawal, often just framed as a simple defeat for the British,
or a win for the Americans.
it was fundamentally a calculated strategic move, driven entirely by global considerations. That threat from the French fleet was seen as far more significant than holding Philadelphia.
So power in 1778, it wasn't about sacred crowns or crushing local uprisings with sheer force. It was about logistics, assessing global threats, navigating international alliances.
And retreat, counterintuitively, could actually be an assertion of strategic power, preserving your forces for the bigger global game.
A very different kind of power from Barbarossa's time.
Totally different.
Okay, let's take one more step forward, June 18th, 1812. Now we see a young nation, the United States, asserting its power in yet another distinct way.
Yeah, and the sources lay out the deep roots of this conflict with Britain, the simmering tensions.
Chief among them, the British practice of impressment.
Basically kidnapping American sailors off American ships and forcing them into the British Royal Navy.
And the numbers the sources give are pretty stark. Estimates are like 6,000 to 9,000 American citizens impressed.
That's a massive violation of national sovereignty, isn't it? Just snatching your people.
Absolutely. And compounding that were Britain's orders in council.
These trade restrictions that heavily limited American trade with Europe, it was crippling the U.S. economy.
American merchant ships were getting seized left and right. Sources mentioned maybe 400 ships taken.
Plus, there was the sense that Britain was stirring up trouble on the western frontier, supporting Native American confederacies like Tecumseh's against American expansion.
So all of this fueled this growing sense of grievance, this demand for action.
And this environment gives rise to the war hawks in Congress. Figures like Henry Clay, John C. Calhoun.
And their motivation, as described in the sources, it was this potent mix, wasn't it?
Yeah, national honor was huge, the demand for free trade, and, let's be honest, a clear desire for territorial expansion, maybe grabbing Canada.
Calhoun famously called it the second struggle for liberty.
Right, framing it as another fight for independence, for national dignity against British arrogance and overreach.
So President Madison sends his war message to Congress on June 1st. The stage is set.
And then June 18th, 1812, Congress votes. They declare war on Great Britain.
And the sources point out this was the first time the United States officially declared war on another nation.
A big step for a young country. And interestingly, the vote itself shows the divisions.
Yeah, 79-49 in the House, pretty significant margin, but much tighter in the Senate, 1913.
So it wasn't a unanimous decision to assert this new kind of power. There was real debate, real partisan division.
The sources give us a quick look at what followed, and militarily, it wasn't exactly an auspicious start for the U.S.
No, the U.S. military was significantly outmatched, especially at sea. Maybe 16 warships compared to Britain's 500 plus.
Early American invasions of Canada largely failed, and the British even managed to burn parts of Washington, D.C.
A definite low point.
The war eventually ends with the Treaty of Ghent in 1814, and basically it restored the pre-war status quo. No major territory changed hands.
Right, so if you just look at the military outcome or the treaty, you might think, what was the point?
But connecting this to the bigger picture of power, the real significance wasn't about conquering land or military dominance initially.
No, the sources really highlight that the true impact of the war, despite all the struggles and the messy outcome, was the forging of a stronger, clearer American national identity.
It created national heroes, like Andrew Jackson after New Orleans.
Enduring symbols like the U.S.'s Constitution, Old Ironsides.
And even the national anthem, right? The Star-Spangled Banner, inspired by the defense of Fort McHenry.
So the U.S., through this act of declaring war based on principal honor, sovereignty, free trade, and then fighting for it, even imperfectly.
It gained international respect. It solidified its identity and sovereignty on the global stage.
This June 18th shows power being asserted differently again, not through ancient ritual, not through purely strategic calculation,
but through the declaration of a national will, based on core principles, penned on paper, fought for, and resulting in identity and respect.
So stepping back, looking across these three June 18th, 1155, 1778, 1812, you really see this incredible evolution, almost 700 years.
Yeah, the idea and the exercise of power, it just keeps shifting.
In 1155, Frederick Barbarossa's tower felt intensely personal, validated by ritual, by divine right.
But absolutely dependent on immediate, brutal physical force to keep order, especially against local challenges, a constant negotiation between emperor, pope, city-state.
Then by 1778, the British Empire's power, while vast, is shown to be subject to global strategic realities, things like alliances, logistics,
projecting force far from home. And retreat could actually be a deliberate strategic calculation, a form of power preservation.
And finally, 1812. American power emerges differently again, not from ancient traditions, not from overwhelming military might at the start,
but from asserting national sovereignty, asserting principles like honor and free trade, declared in ink, fought for.
And ultimately creating a stronger national identity and earning respect on the world stage.
It really raises an important question, doesn't it? What stands out most to you about how the fundamental basis, the very expression of power, shifted across these centuries? all highlighted on this one specific date.
Yeah. How does seeing these different forms, personal and ritualistic, strategic and global, principled and national, how does that help us understand the world back then? And maybe more importantly, does it offer a lens for looking at power dynamics now?
It truly is remarkable how one date can illuminate such profound changes in this human story of power. From, crowns anointed with oil and stained with blood,
To strategic maps guiding calculated withdrawals.
to declarations penned with ink and defended with principle, however imperfectly.
Just think about the different forces defining each era, the immense weight of tradition and religion back then.
And then the pressures of global empires,
Yeah.
shifting alliances.
And then that fiery assertion of national rights, national identity.
So as you, our listeners, mull over these historical deep dives, here's a thought maybe to leave you with. If power continues to evolve, and it surely does, what forms of power do you see emerging or becoming most dominant in our world today?
And how might historians, maybe centuries from now, look back on the turning points, the June 18th of our era? What will they see?
Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and ring that bell for more history daily.